Welcome everybody. We are starting our program for the day, and I welcome all of you on behalf of Law and Society Alliance and Defense Capital, which are the two hosts for the day. And today's webinar is on the topic data as a weapon, Chinese invasion through mobile apps and 5G technology. We have a panel of very eminent speakers who have dealt with the subject in different formats. One of them is a technocrat and a bureaucrat, former bureaucrat, who has also served in the industry body. And also we have an activist for data sovereignty, and we have a journalist who is a political and a policy commentator. So this is the wide range of speakers we have. And we expect a couple of more technocrats also to join and speak in this webinar today. I will introduce them as and when their turn comes to speak. Till the time, we will move forward with the show, with the program, and then let me introduce the hosts for the evening, the two organizations that are hosting it. We have Law and Society Alliance, which is a New Delhi headquartered independent national growth organization, and a Think and Act tank. We like to call ourselves that way. We work and have presence in and volunteers in across the country, including in the cities like Mumbai, Chennai, Chandigarh, Hyderabad, and Bangalore. And Law and Society Alliance basically provides legal and knowledge intervention on national issues that need study, research, analysis, and prolonged groundwork. Matters such as national security, human rights, terrorism, narcotics trade, and its links to terrorism and various other subjects, legal reform. Because we have advocates, a lot of advocates who are part of the alliance. We work on legal aspects also, legal issues also. So we also work on financial inclusion, economic growth, and all of the works of human activity, which are aimed at development, modernization of human living, and cultural moorings of humanism. So these are the focus areas that Law and Society works on. And the think tank also encourages dialogue and interaction between and among government and civil society. It also aims at fostering a cooperative work culture for the common good of national growth. In this effort, Law and Society Alliance brings together a network of experienced lawyers, journalists, businessmen, and business houses, chartered accountants, trade and commerce experts, government officials, former bureaucrats and diplomats, former police and military officers, and independent corporate professionals and CEOs to the table for discussion on various subjects. Our other host is Defense Capital, which is a national defense and aerospace and strategic affairs magazine and a news portal. And the magazine loves to initiate debates on issues concerning all aspects of national life, particularly in the sectors that we work on. And we are just the Defense Capital is just 6 months old, but it caters to a very niche audience, which comprises of policymakers, decision makers, and armed forces personnel, industry executives, and even the workforce and enthusiasts who are interested in the sector. So this is the introduction for the two organizations that are our hosts today. Before I call the speakers, I would like to introduce the subject of the day, so that there is a larger discussion that happens. By the time I hope that my third speaker will also join for the day. Yeah, he has joined already, so I'll be very happy to introduce him as he has already joined. The topic of the day is data as a weapon, Chinese invasion through mobile apps and 5G technology is what we are discussing today. So the last 2 months, we have witnessed a very clear but avoidable unwarranted military battle in Ladakh, and there's psychological maneuverings also being done by the People's Republic of China, that's People's Liberation Army in Ladakh. So we all know about it. We have been reading about it in the newspapers. But the threat and effort to grab the Indian territory by the Chinese Communist Party and its expansionist president Xi Jinping is all well known. It's a clear and present danger that we all know about it, because it's about the land grabbing effort of China, territorial expansionist movement moved by China. That we all know. But what we all generally ignore and don't know is about the Chinese invasion into our living rooms and into our mobile apps, on our mobiles and our devices, and other aspects of technological innovation that happens by the Chinese Communist Party. Uh, because we all know that all tech companies that work from out of China and have origins in China, they are all arms of the Chinese Communist Party, and they have Chinese Communist Party executives who are in the key decision-making positions, probably more than even the board. They can kind of maneuver the activities of these companies, and that presents a clear danger to India's national security. And the digital colonization is quite apparent, and that happens through the ICE technologies, information, communication, and entertainment technologies, particularly the mobile apps and other technologies that involve information technology, communication, and telecom. So, incidentally, just a couple of days back, the government has decided to ban 59 mobile apps, uh, you know, citing this national security as a reason for this move. And the government has also indicated that they'll be banning some Chinese companies in infrastructure projects in India, and those are going to have a great impact on the Chinese, companies and their bottom lines ultimately. But there are key basic questions that are bothering the minds of several activists who work on the net neutrality space. One of the suggestions for questions that came from a participant includes, why only 59 mobile apps that were banned? Why not more? Are there only 59 apps that are available in India from the Chinese, companies? So there are plenty of them. Why not those two are? So should we go and ban them? That was one of the questions that came in the minds of the participant who was here today. There were also participants on wide spectrum of questions that other participants put forth. One of them was this ban on the mobile apps, quite thought out, or is it arbitrary? Where they really, was there impact analysis done by the government before this decision was taken? Because they were citing the legal problems that the TikTok ban encountered in 2019 after the Madras High Court had passed the judgment, an order, and then they had to reverse it ultimately because of legal issues that were involved. And the companies keep saying that they have not violated any national security guidelines. Is that true? We need to examine that question today. So there was the net neutrality activists asked a question: what happens to net neutrality now? Are just the Chinese a national security problem? What happens to other, and will this be a reciprocal construct as far as China is concerned? So, because this is mentioned in the data protection bill that was introduced by this government recently, so we need to examine these aspects also. And one of the, the future, we are going to talk about the future also. It's happened. 59 mobile apps has already happened. The 5G technology, the reports have said that government is considering some trade and procurement curves targeting China, and the increasing scrutiny of Chinese investment in many sectors is also happening. So there will be a weighing of a decision to keep out the Chinese companies from 5G trials, particularly Huawei, which is a Chinese technology company. So keeping all these Chinese companies could potentially cost the Chinese companies billions of dollars in contracts and future earnings. That is quite visible. There are already noise from China about WTO, and which the Indian government has countered in the recent statement yesterday. So the message from Delhi is it cannot continue trade and investment relations as normal as it used to be if China does not agree to return to the status quo of April as far as the incursion in LAC in Ladakh is concerned. So some commentators have already expressed concerns enabling China to use Huawei 5G technology to create a China-centered technology order, around the world, which is a so-called Pax Iniga, which is kind of worrying, and it has a lot of global implications. As use of 5G technology from other European countries and Russian companies, is it better than China's? We need to examine that. And also the question that whether India is capable of developing its, It's 5G technology. How much of time is required to do that? That is also a big challenge that we need to discuss today. So on the technical side, increased visualization of 5G infrastructure means that the many functions now built into hardware when it is manufactured will increasingly be transferred to software. So those who are wondering what 5G is, I'll just give you a what it really means. So we all know how the mobile technology developed. We started off with just the voice services, and then the 2G happened, where still the focus was on voice, but we did make a switch to the digital standards and enabling text messaging. And then 3G happened when we introduced data services, extending the functionality beyond voice to include multimedia and limited internet access. It was not until 4G that full specification based on internet protocol was allowed for functional mobile broadband, in turn serving as a platform for dizzying innovation in mobile applications. These waves of technological changes have come in roughly in decade-long cycles. First generation mobile voice in 1980s, the 2G in 1990s, 3G basic in the 2000s, 4G LTE data in the 2010s in one sense, and 5G is simply the next step in the cycle. By the way, LTE means long-term evaluation. So that is some basic information for people who are wondering what 5G is. So I think we also know about the geopolitical side, where the US has welcomed India's move, and it is also moving to kind of restrict Chinese companies' technological activities as far as China is concerned. So this is the background in which we will be discussing today. So let me, before I call the speakers, I have the proud privilege of introducing Sri R. Chandrasekhar ji. He's a former president of NASSCOM, the National Association of Software and Services Companies, which is a trade association of Indian information technology and business process outsourcing industry. It was established in 1988. He served till 2018, and now he's a independent observer and a commentator. He has also served in the Union government and the Andhra Pradesh government as Secretary of Telecom and Information Technology. He's one of the most popular alumni of the Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay, and Penn State University in the US. Chandrasekhar, it's a pleasure welcoming you, and we are very glad to host you today. Thank you for your presence and your time. The next speaker is Sri Vineet Goenka. Vineet is a very dear friend, and we are known to each other for very long since our student days. And but he's a secretary of Center for Knowledge Sovereignty, and he's also a data sovereignty activist. And he has authored a super hit book on data sovereignty along with several Indian defense, cyber security, and national security experts. It is a worth a buy and worth a reading. So please do buy this data sovereignty book of Vineet Goenka. He has in recent years done some ragingly popular policy and legal interventions regarding the not so legal business practices of foreign origin information technology and IT as a service companies and social media giants, including Twitter, which is the latest fad, particularly for not storing data in India and not adhering to some key Indian laws. He's also a popular commentator on TV news debates. So welcome, Viniji. Pleasure to have you here, and thank you for your presence today. And our most important speaker of the day will be Siddharth Zarabi. Uh, Siddharth is also a very long time friend since our student days we know each other. Siddharth Zarabi is a well-known public policy commentator. He has been a television journalist for over 2 decades now. He has worked with Indian Express Group, Hindustan Times Business Standard, CNBC, Bloomberg News, and BTVI, building his career as a reporter and reaching the pinnacle of his journalistic career to be the editor-in-chief of a television news channel. He also runs, along with like-minded friends, a platform called Kashmironomics that focuses on to boost business and economy of Jammu and Kashmir and bringing the present-day Union territory into the economic mainstream of India. Uh, so with that, we'll come to our, some of the brass tacks. I request every participant to please mute themselves so that there is no disturbance when the speakers are speaking, and so that everybody can listen to what they are saying very clearly. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat box. I'll, as a moderator, will be more than happy to take it up. If you have any background programs working which use your voice and video, applications, please do switch them off and please stay on WebEx so that you have clarity in both voice and video. If you have broadband issues, please close the video so that you are at least the voice, you can hear them properly and there is clarity in what speakers say. Thank you very much. I now invite uh, Vineet Goenkaji, who will be our first speaker of the day, to put forth his views. Every speaker gets about 10 minutes to comment, and then we'll come back for questions and 3-minute closing remarks at the end of the show. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, Bipin. Before I start, let me give my pranams to two eminent people whom I can see in the participant list. One is Lakshman Rao Apte. He has been very helpful and I am like a son to him. And I also, Mr. Hariharan Appa is here, and Appa is the reason behind my being here. So pranams to both of them. And let me just put my perspective to all the people who are here. See, we will have to understand in today's world, there are three types of war which we've been talking about, or colonization, we've been talking about all these kind of things. So when we wrote the book, the first chapter talks about colonization. So human beings have seen colonizations for centuries and centuries, but that colonization was military colonization, where one person would come and try to overpower another person with the help of stick, stone, gun, cannon, sword, whatever kind of weapon. Or a group of people would try to empower another group of people, or a kingdom over another kingdom, a country over another country. And that kind of conflict, that kind of supering others was called as colonization of military. So it was military colonization. But the last 2 centuries, we saw another kind of colonization, and this colonization was energy colonization, where people started dictating terms on the energy. So oil producing countries would dictate terms to oil consuming countries, and there were also countries which were not manufacturing or producing or excavating oil, but they would dictate the terms to buy oil from that country at this cost, or else we will do this. So this kind of was going on. But the last 2 decades, if you see, this has moved out. People have evolved, civilization have evolved, and now there is data colonization. One who has control over the data rules over other people. And specifically, if you give a reason, the subjects, today's topic, data as weapon, China invention through mobile apps. Now, let me take you back sometime, and you'll have to give me a liberty to talk a little bit here and there so that I can make sense. China was very clear 2 decades back. Its strategy was very clear. They had 4 approaches to the strategy. One approach was Great Wall. Put the wall. They never allowed Western or any other technologies to enter their premises. So they had a wall which was created between their people, their consumers, and the world. So they denied the world 1/6 of human beings. 15% of the market was denied to the world population. That number 2, they had another strategy called as penetration or encroachment. Under the penetration or encroachment, what you say in Hindi, and then they would like to penetrate your economies, and they would do that through any means. Third was economical. Now, if you ask me why is Chinese products comparatively cheaper than your own product, the reason may not be that they are efficient. Reason may not be that they have lesser cost raw materials or lesser cost labor. Arbitrage. But the state would take over the cost. So the discounting which was done by the Chinese state made them competitive to the world. The Chinese supplier would never ask you what is the requirement or what is the cost you want to buy. They would ask you what is your current price, and they would give you the prices, things which are 15-20% discount in the current price. Reason, because back home their state would discount that difference of cost. Now this thing, and the final approach which they had was coercion. Buy out the brains. They knew that there are economies which may not come under the pressure of cheaper or economical things, that they would buy out the brains. They started investing through your own people. Under the camouflage, you would feel that that product is yours. So that kind of thing. So this was a strategy applied by Chinese, and what you saw is fantastic encroachment. I would say it has to be a digital colonization. Now, 59 app is a tip of iceberg, and tell you, because he was in the thick of the things, how many other apps should be banned immediately, or maybe probably Siddharth would be the right person to know, because he meets all the business tycoons. But I'll give you two examples, one very trivial example and a very strategic example, which will tell you what is the power of data or what is the power of the person who has the data. I have a friend called as Rajkumar who comes from Coimbatore, and I'm deliberately naming. And Rajkumar runs a cable operation there. There in the cable operation, the important part which is there at the customer's place is the set-top box. Now, the set-top box has been manufactured by a manufacturer. Some dispute happened between Rajkumar and the manufacturer of the setup. And one night, one evening, all the broadcasting consumers saw one message coming from the manufacturer that I have a dispute with Rajkumar. Now, that is very embarrassing. Thousands of kilometers away from the location of the end user, somebody chose to write a message because the source code was with that person. This is a tribal issue where a supply line of cable TV was disturbed. Or I remember one example which was given to me by Lieutenant General Vinod Bhatia, that a drilling machine was operating at a tunnel. All of a sudden, it's dysfunctioned. It was not functioning. They tried. Finally, after giving it up, they went to the manufacturer that this machine is not functioning. Send some engineer to repair it. They said, you don't need an engineer. You have to pay us your AMI. We will start it from here itself. The funds were released and they started it. That means that somebody had a control back there. Now, just think about if a small trivial example of that data set-top box or this example of this machine, that tells you that somebody has this information and somebody is using this information. Now, let me tell you how did they penetrate, and then I can tell you what is the function. They knew that India is a country of multiple languages, not only 52 languages which are approved, but thousands of languages. See, if you go to Tamil Nadu, Tamil, which is spoken in tip of the peninsula, Kanyakumari, is much different than what you speak in the Chennai region. Or if you come to Mumbai, I come from Mumbai. The language spoken in Mumbai is far different than what it is spoken in Vidarbha. So there are multiple languages within the language itself. They knew this. While the Westerners provided Twitter, Facebook, WhatsApp, they chose to give this in the native language so that people have that comfort. And they gave you TikTok. What happened is everybody migrated there, and you saw the same people who were finding it difficult to operate on Twitter, Facebook, or WhatsApps of the world. They were comfortable on TikTok, and Twitter had a far penetration. What does it happen? What does it do? Well, a person, when he uses social media, he shares his emotion. He also displays his IQ. He's searching things. When a person is searching certain thing, there is a system where you can understand what is being searched where. I'll give you a small example. When we have this in Maharashtra, there is a thing which is called as Wari. Recently, there was a festival of Ashadi Ekadashi where all the pilgrimage, they moved to one particular place, which is Pandharpur. They knew that people are moving and how many thousand people are moving. They knew that this many people, they go there time and again. And one of the equipment which these Warkaris have, these people who go on pilgrimage, is the tal, the small metal piece which they use to play their hymns. Then exactly when it is needed, what is the cost? So what they did is they started dumping near the Warkaris. You come on the Kavod of the north, they knew that Kavod comes at this particular time, and this is the cost of the Kavod which is manufactured indigenously in India. They dumped things which is at lesser cost. Now, you never thought that somebody would dump tal, or somebody would dump the Kavod things in your market and make money. Well, they knew that this is a requirement. Now you can make it up. There's two small trivial example to the strategic requirements of your manufacturing machines and this. Now this could go there only because they had data. Somewhere the data was collected, the capacity, the quantum computing powers which they had, coupled with other theorems, maybe algorithms like artificial intelligence, other things, which gave them decisive inputs. The informed decision making is the most powerful information tool which a person can have when you have to make decisions. And the decisions for economical decisions or strategic decisions are best when you have informed decision making. They had inputs. How many Indians? What are they eating? What is the requirement? What is they are speaking about their own government? What are they talking about the conditions in the market? And they could manipulate this because they had particular part. These small things. See, they knew that you are 130 crore people, and you will all have capacity to migrate from regular phone to a smartphone. And very nicely, as I said, their second strategy was to penetrate you. So what they did is, if you come to India, more than 66% of the manufactured hardware of mobile is basically Chinese. You tell any name that has a sizable component of Chinese. Reason because they knew that this is the market they wanted to have so that they can have backdoors. I fear, I don't have solid evidences, but I fear a camera in a city, if it is linked through certain systems, whether they can have a live telecast of that particular area. It is quite possible if it, if they have backdoors to all the channels which have connectivity to that particular camera. Now, these apprehensions come because there are evidences where you could see the things happening in your life. So data became a tool in their hand. As I said, with the new fourth industrial revolution or the fifth generation technology, especially the geospatial part, did we ever think that a farmer who is using a tractor can be a tool of spy for an foreign agency? The tractor can have inbuilt sensors which can tell which latitude, which longitude it has been used. The power comes through the dynamo which has been generated. It can also tell what is the hardness of the crust of that particular soil, how frequently that has been used, what is been used. It can have sensors, spatial mapping of that particular area, and you may not know that farmer helps them to do a mapping of that particular area, which otherwise you would spend a lot of cost or you may spend a lot of manpower to have it. So before you have inputs, they may have an input. So they would know that you are trying to sow cotton and what will be the estimated hectares under cotton cultivation. So they can calculate what will be your total production of cotton, and then they can work out whether they should export clothes to you or not, or fashion to you or not. Now these all things come because they have data which is there. And I felt I should talk to you all that the machines which are coming under the new regime, which are especially the fifth generation technologies, be it be IoT, be it be AI, machine learning, be it be other tools, they all would lead to data being exported. So the only need which we have is something which is called as data sovereignty, where we have been talking about this in the book, and also the experts talk about this. The data should reside within the political boundaries of the country. It should not go out, whether it is personal data, whether it is commercial data, whether it is strategic data. That was the whole idea. I would like to end with one example. See, we all knew that the Ottoman Empire or the Constantinople or the Egyptians or the Persians, that particular part of the geography was in war for hundreds of years, thousands of years. Especially the Iraqis, they were in war. 1991, when they were attacked by US forces, and when I was studying this, I was surprised to see that not a single plane flight took off from Iraqi air forces. I put this question to Lieutenant General Shekatkar. Sir, were they cowards? Were they afraid? Why didn't they take a flight? They should have fought Americans. Whether they would have won the battle or not, anyway, they were going to be defeated. Why didn't they take off? If you read through the pages, and after 30 years, I can always talk, and it is a classified information of that particular country, so I don't worry whether it is classified. The radio sets on the plane acted against Iraq. Iraq had purchased the plane, including the radio set, but a pilot flies through the skies with the help of radio set, and that voice was shut by the opponents of Iraq. And probably that was the start when you knew that data and the technology will play decisive role in tomorrow's. So, Bipin, I would like to rest here. I can keep talking about this because there are a lot of things which has to be talked, but maybe once I hear the other panelists.
I think we'll come back because there will be some final remarks that we'll be making and some question answer also. So now I take this opportunity to invite Chandrasekharji. I've introduced him earlier, and Chandrasekharji is a very experienced person in these sort of technologies. So please, sir, the time is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Vipindra. I think this, first of all, I want to congratulate you on choosing this topic. I think it's not only a very, very important topic, but it's also very, very timely in the current, especially in the current context. I think you had probably decided on this before the apps, the Chinese apps were banned, just a day or two before. And therefore, now it becomes even more topical for us to understand the totality of the context, because this is not just one isolated action. I think we have to look at it as a part of a overall long-term strategy and not one-off action. So coming to the topic of data as a weapon and the whole Chinese invasion in that context, both on the platform side as well as on the 5G infrastructure side. I think the fact of the matter is that today a lot of the technology has moved onto platforms. And all of these platforms are large mega platforms at a global scale. And the result of it is that there is, because of the network effect, a certain natural gravitation towards these large monolithic platforms. And we have seen several of these platforms, and social media in particular has become extremely popular and pervasive. Whether it is a Facebook or a WhatsApp or a Twitter, or now we have seen TikTok and other examples. We've also seen e-commerce. So all of this has profoundly changed the nature of interaction, both social and economic. Normally, we look at security and economic aspects as somewhat distinct from each other. Although, of course, we recognize that you cannot be really militarily strong unless you are economically strong also. But that is a connection at a very high level. But as far as this issue is concerned, both the economic aspect and the security aspect are closely intertwined within the issue itself. And it's very important to recognize that aspect because the issues and challenges in this area cannot be understood just in terms of economics, cannot be understood also just in terms of technology. And also, of course, when we look at security, we cannot ignore these other two dimensions as well. So what has happened also is that as a result of these large, globally, monolithic platforms emerging, most of them were dominated by the US tech companies, and they grew by their global footprint. Whereas, of course, they established their footprint in the US initially, and then used that capital and the technology base to expand to other countries and established a major foothold in all the Western countries and in other countries, including India. China followed a very different model where they first closed themselves, as Vinitji has mentioned, and then built a strong base within the country, created economic surpluses on that basis, and now are trying to use that to spread their footprint across the world and pose a challenge to the established, platforms, social media platforms. And they have come with their own innovative models. As somebody said, it's not that video sharing apps were not there earlier. We had the YouTube and so on. But as somebody put it, this is like the 2020 version for social interaction. The fact, therefore, is that with these very large platforms, they are getting access to mountains of data about individuals. And given again the way that technology has and artificial intelligence and machine learning and data analytics and data sciences have evolved, it's the data per se is the foundation, but what is equally, if not more important, is the kind of intelligence that gets built up on the basis of that data. And there's a huge value addition that takes place there. And that value addition in terms of the analysis of this data, in terms of the intelligence that is built on it, in terms of the inferences that can be drawn from it, all are based on the advanced technologies that have been built on that basis. Now we have also seen the evolution to the next level, which is to actually not just use this for the purpose of analysis and building intelligence, but actually to alter behavior and to influence behavior using technologies to push certain kinds of data and information to individuals, which tends to influence them. If you go on getting information of a certain kind or propagating a certain view, you are likely to start believing in that, and therefore they have also acquired that ability. And given that they have that ability, then it becomes important as to what interests they represent, or whether there are any other interests which are lending themselves or which these platforms are lending themselves to. They are able to push information onto public opinion. Now, whatever I have mentioned so far is common for all platforms. It does not matter which country it is from. It does not matter which company it is from. All of these platforms, depending on the kind of information that they deal with, have this kind of data and this kind of access and this kind of ability. For those who are interested in understanding more deeply, a little bit at least, about what is the kind of power that these platforms have, all you have to do is watch a documentary like The Great Hack, which talks about Facebook and all the efforts that went into influencing the US elections. For a democracy, of course, elections are the most important aspect because they ultimately represent the will of the people. So if you can subvert that, then you can subvert the entire country literally overnight. So all of these are, things which are very much not only in the realm of possibility today, but which are happening. And so it's no longer theory. What makes it different in the case of the Chinese apps is two things. And I think that's where we have to see that this is not something which is exclusively to the Chinese, but there are two factors which make it imperative to act as far as the Chinese are concerned. Number one is, in the other cases, those platforms are believed to be leveraging this data and intelligence for economic gains, for building up, their companies' valuations, revenues, etc., and using it for those kinds of purposes. In the case of the Chinese apps, again, as Vinitji has pointed out, there are strong allegations that they have strong links to the government in China. They have strong links to the PLA itself. And therefore, when you combine that link with the power that I was talking about earlier, then that combination becomes far more deadly from a security point of view. The second point which makes this case of Chinese apps completely different from the other mega platforms is the fact that we are involved, by whatever polite name you call it, in an armed confrontation at the border with them. And irrespective of whether we find a peaceful solution now, or it continues for a while, or it degenerates into something more serious, the fact remains that the vulnerability to this antagonist is something that we simply cannot afford from a national security perspective. And therefore, there is a need to look at a lot of these apps through a completely different lens. And sometimes people, I think, ask perhaps a question which to my mind is not the most appropriate, which is saying what law did they violate? And whatever violations or infractions they are doing are actually done by many other social media platforms. But we are not at war with those countries. We are not facing an armed confrontation, nor are those linked with any government at the other end, to the best of our knowledge. And nor do we see any evidence or practice of that. In fact, many of them have even opposed their own government. For example, some of them have denied certain technologies to their own government, which they believe are, against certain democratic principles. So I think that is the other category. Of course, all of this begs one very, very important question. If we are anyway going to be vulnerable, and we are saying, let us not be vulnerable to these people, what remains is vulnerability to somebody else. So ultimately, the solution does lie in trying to build our own capacity and build our own capability, so that ultimately vulnerability to external countries and forces is minimized. So given all of this, I think the approach to the trend of weaponization of social media has to be built on denying our immediate antagonists here and now, which has been done thankfully by the government, but over a longer term, building our own capability as quickly as possible. This closure has opened up an opportunity for people in the country, and we need to make sure that it is occupied and that vacuum is filled by entities which are in India and of India, because our future technology development is also dependent on a lot of this data. Let me leave the topic of the apps and the invasion at that. We can discuss more in terms of the strategic responses. And let me spend a few minutes on the 5G part of it, because now we are shifting to the hardware and the base part of it. Now, while a lot of this data exchange takes place obviously on the telecom network, the vulnerabilities that I talked about can be at many, many levels. I think all the technologies are familiar. It can be at the level of the app, it can be at the level of the communication layer, it can be in terms of the operating system, it can be at the at so many different levels. Any or all of these can actually be a source of vulnerability. But ultimately, everything is resting on physical infrastructure, and if the hardware itself is vulnerable, then whatever kind of application, software, OS, and all of that that you build on top of that is not going to be less vulnerable. It's only going to be exposed to the same vulnerability. A lot of these kinds of hardware also are maintained remotely. We live in a world where security is a running battle. It's a continuous battle. So whether it is an operating system or any other system, remote management to combat security issues is a fact of life. It's therefore important to look at both the manufacture and how this infrastructure is managed and what are the vulnerabilities that it creates and exposes us to. Why does 5G become even more important? Because today a lot of this communication is from people to people. It is from people to computer or computer to people. But as today we have about 20 billion connected devices. But as we go forward, a lot of the communication is actually going to be machine to machine. And in fact, eventually 90% of the communication will be machine to machine, where people will not be involved at all. So the kind of vulnerabilities that it can create and the implications that it has are not only enormous, but very, very difficult to fathom. So we need to ensure that our own infrastructure is not vulnerable. But let us also keep in mind one more factor, and that's where the challenge comes. It's a very simple matter to say, okay, shut out XYZ country or XYZ company. But for India, what are the compulsions? We need good quality infrastructure, and we also need low cost infrastructure. Affordability is important because we want to have an inclusive agenda within our country. So if you take the example of some of the Chinese suppliers, you take the examples of Huawei or ZTE, etc. Why we had them in the fray, apart from the issues of access to the Indian market or whatever broad general principles people talk about, was that their presence had a moderating effect on the pricing of other suppliers whom we regard as being less dangerous. So, and remember one thing, that in telecom, you can get the same piece of infrastructure for 1,000 rupees and you can get it for 100 rupees. I've seen this in my life. I've dealt with them a number of times. It all depends on the competitive environment. So if we are eliminating a very low-priced equipment supplier for very good reasons, and obviously in the current situation, we have no choice but to do it very quickly, immediately. But we have to have a strategy for how we are going to deal with the cost implications that it might have and how we don't become vulnerable from an economic angle as far as infrastructure is concerned. Now, I was just talking to the chief technology officer for Huawei at the time when I was the telecom secretary. And, it was surprising to know that they had about 110,000 employees. And how many were in manufacturing and how many were in sales? There were very, very few in manufacturing, hardly any. Everything was outsourced. And they had in India some 4,000 or 5,000 people who were in sales. But out of their strength, 60 to 70,000 people were in research. That's the scale of work. So let us not think that Chinese have simply stolen the technology from somebody and built it. They have invested over a continuous period of time a huge amount of effort in research. So we need to build that capacity within the country. CDOT has done some good work, but I think we need to look at both government and the private sector entities to do this kind of research over a long term, so that as we are building our infrastructure, we are also building our capability simultaneously. If we don't do that and we don't have a clear, then I'm afraid that we would have pushed back one important threat, but would be left vulnerable to an altogether different kind of threat, which may be non-security, but ultimately which will undermine our overall objectives in the digital India. So I think we are in that sense, I would say, between a rock and a hard place. And ultimately, we do need to ensure that our core technologies, we have a certain measure of autonomy. What is the way to do this apart from just making those statements? I think we need to recognize that as far as telecom is concerned, we are one of the largest markets in the world. We are the largest per capita consumer of data. And therefore, we have to think intelligently how we leverage this market power to get major technology providers and equipment manufacturers to come into India. Because, like we had the phased manufacturing program in the automotive sector, ensuring that any major supplier to the Indian market actually sets up shop in India would be important, because let's face it, we are not going to develop the technology overnight. We may have the policy today, but tomorrow morning we are not going to have the technology. So we'll have to have a short-term strategy of how we cross the immediate hump, and then how we are going to build that. And one of the ways could be to get companies which are servicing the Indian market to actually set up their operations in India and have a strategy to ensure that that technology is absorbed and assimilated by Indian companies, or that there are other Indian companies. I know of several, at least 3 or 4 Indian companies which are extremely good and have their own technology and have a global footprint also. How do we encourage them? I think these are the real questions that we should be focusing on if we want to ensure that from a security point of view, also our longer term interest is taken care of. We have in the area of telecom looked so far largely at handsets. And while there are some security issues concerning handsets, I don't want to minimize that. I think Vinitji has talked about that. But unless the core telecom infrastructure, the core network infrastructure is secured, having some of the manufacturing of handsets done in India is a very, very small part of this whole challenge that I have outlined. So these are the issues, and I think it would be great if we can be of any help in finding the right path to that self reliance or Atmanirbhar in terms of these core technologies and core infrastructure. All our other infrastructure will actually ride on this infrastructure, whether it is our power infrastructure, our transportation infrastructure, our logistics infrastructure, our smart city infrastructure. Everything rides only on this. So it is fundamental to the fundamentals. I mean, that's how important it is, and there's no way that we can underestimate. No way that we can overestimate the importance of this. So I'll stop there. I know I've taken a lot of time, but I thought that this backdrop, I think, needs to be kept in mind as we discuss these issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, Chandra, sir, for your very insightful presentation on this subject. I think it covered the entire gamut of questions that were there in the people's mind. But before I proceed, I have to recognize the presence of a few senior, officials and friends of mine who are here. Lieutenant General Vinod Bhatia ji is here. He is the director of CENJOS, Center for Joint Movement Studies. He retired as the Director General of Military Operations from the Indian Army. So thank you for your presence, and I'm listening to the conversation that's happening here. We have Advocate Neeraj Arora, who's again, we became friends very recently. He deals with the cyber security subject, and we have agreed to work together on issues of national security in the cyber security space. I also want to recognize the presence of Jaideep Singh ji, who's again an advocate from Delhi and a very dear friend. Thank you, Jaideep ji, for joining. I have Prabhakar Paranjpai ji, who is from Forum for Integrated National Security, is also present here today. So thank you for joining. Before I go on to the next speaker, if there are any questions from the audience participants, please do put it in the chat box. We'll take it up quickly as soon as the speaker of the day finishes his speech, the last speaker of the day. Siddharth Sarabi, I've introduced him already, so I give the floor to him right away. Siddharth, now it's your time, please.
Thank you very much, and my warmest good wishes to the panel, Mr. Chandrasekhar, Vinit ji. Thank you very much, Bipin, for having me, and to all the distinguished panelists. I now have the difficult task of trying to make sense after someone of such eminence as Mr. Chandrasekhar and such a vocal activist as Vinit Bhai. So what I'm going to do is I will try and relate this issue through a small story that I witnessed way back almost 20 years back. And before I start, I would say that the recent incidents have woken up even me, who has spent a lifetime and actually began by reporting on India's IT industry, telecom industry. And I've spent so many years there that I hope that there would be a time when I would not be spending years in those areas, because that's how much I had done that. So I want to talk about the China angle, because it's a great moment in our, I would say, in our economic, strategic, national security history. In 1999, the ingress in Kargil forced India to sit up and take notice of how strategic space on the borders could not be ceded, even as you tried to restore political and diplomatic relations. 21 years later, China has provided a signal to all of India that it is time to wake up. And I'm going to thank the Chinese for doing this, because otherwise waking up a nation of 1.3 billion people would have been very difficult. And as activists like Vinit Goenka know, you can keep talking, you can keep shouting, you can keep tweeting, but people will be very happy in buying cheap stuff, because affordability and the rise of the Indian consumption class as a consequence of the reforms of the 90s make them impervious to every other strategic concern. यानी ये विषय ऐसा है कि देश के लिए लड़ना जरूरी है, बट मैं नहीं, मेरे बगल वाला लड़े तो मैं खुश हूं. So that has been the approach. In somewhere in the early 2000 or thereabout, my memory does not serve me right on the exact month or date, India saw a surfeit of ISP licenses being issued, Internet Service Provider licenses. And those were the days when it used to be a big issue. There was a lot of fanfare. ISP licenses were issued, and then those ISPs used to launch services, very nice CDs with the dial-up software, and they would come in small boxes. And because all companies and all new product launches have marketing budgets, they would distribute these CDs. A few months later, I chanced upon a story, and I was with the Hindustan Times at that time, when we discovered that a foreign intelligence agency had alerted their Indian counterparts that some document that was of a sensitive nature had fallen in their hands, and because that agency was of a friendly nation, they passed it on. And when this was investigated in India by the concerned people, they found that the document number and some hints in the document eventually led them to a joint secretary's office. And that poor unfortunate joint secretary was grilled and asked several questions. And he protested his innocence, obviously, because the suspicion was that he had photocopied and faxed or provided a copy of that document in some manner. The investigation continued, and eventually one of the guys, and I was told at that time when I was reporting, working on the story, that a young engineer from NIC opened the person's office computer and found that there was a dial-up software installed of a company, ISP, that was headquartered in Hong Kong. And that ISP software, when this officer was asked, he said, well, somebody had come and gifted him a small box of that software. I mean, it was nothing really. It was just one CD in it. And he was using this to go onto the net. And somehow, as this officer, who was amongst the very few in the government of India who was actually conversant with a computer and was typing and working on a draft of that strategically important document, and he used to save it on his comp and then go home. Somehow, this dial-up software had opened a backdoor in his computer and transmitted that file. This was my first real experience of how data was being stolen electronically. I come from an army family, so I've heard stories about spies, and I've read my share of novels, and have had a vivid imagination about it. And I also come from Kashmir, so I have seen some other aspects of this, but that was the first time I realized how data could be stolen. Now, why I told you this rather long story is that 20 years have passed since. You no longer need dial-up softwares. You no longer use desktops so much. The phone that I use today is by a far order of magnitude, maybe 10 times more powerful than the desktops that I started off my career as a journalist. And everything, including scanning, image capture, video capture, voice capture, transmission, communication is in the phone. And in the 5G world, Huawei is the actual boss. He's the King Kong of 5G, the evolving 5G ecosystem. ZTE tags along with Huawei. I think the Chinese state and the PLA have propped up ZTE as a shadow of Huawei, that wherever Huawei is not able to make inroads, whatever little market share is left out, that ZTE should capture. And in my reporting career, I have seen that China has had a consistent philosophy of championing companies as national champions. And I say this with all seriousness. In the 17th century, Imperial Britain, which was then an impoverished nation where the emperor or the queen were perpetually in debt of moneylenders, utilized the instrument of the East India Company to eventually conquer and create one of the largest imperial kingdoms in the world. And the unfortunate victim of the East India Company was Bharat and the multiple kingdoms there. And we got colonized through sheer military power and what was then advanced technology. I would say that China has a history, and not just in Huawei or ZTE. You can take out a list of power equipment manufacturers, turbine manufacturers. You can, from golf equipment to high cost pens, to luxury watches, to pretty much every industrial sector. China's philosophy and operating dynamic in creating and supporting these companies is to create the modern day equivalent of East India companies. And Vineet Goenka has written about it. And I personally believe that we are waking up now after years of having already surrendered our digital sovereignty. And like Mr. Chandrasekhar said, the word digital today combines everything. There was a time when reporters like me were reporting about the convergence bill, which never came to life. Now, what are my key 2-3 points that we should look ahead? What has happened in the past cannot be now unwound. We cannot create a Huawei and ZTE overnight. We cannot even create a Hikvision whose security cameras are actually sophisticated spying devices who transmit real-time video or to servers back in mainland China. We cannot also reverse immediately overnight the dominance, 70-80% dominance that Chinese bulk drug firms have in our active pharmaceutical industrial sector. And I can keep going down that list. In fact, I firmly believe that barring civilian passenger jumbo jets and aircraft, China has successfully copied, reverse engineered, and where those things have not been possible, outrightly stolen technology from across the world. The only two things that they have not been able to do is to create good enough passenger aircraft that they believe can fly with their own citizens. So that's why a majority of the Chinese civil aviation aircraft are either Boeing or Airbus, and including the Chinese state planes that are used by their president and high officials, even they are Boeing manufactured planes. So that's the only technology that they haven't been able to fully master. And I suspect that while they may have some prototypes hidden away somewhere, they are not putting them in the air because they don't want the risk of planes carrying 300, 250 people falling out of the sky, because even their warplanes, fighter planes are known to fly out, to fall out of the sky. You just don't get to hear about it, but that doesn't mean that that is not happening. So where does it leave us, and what should be our national priorities? Because it should not be that due to the emotion, due to the shock, due to the rude shock that millions and millions of Indians have received at China's betrayal, and a generation which had not seen 62 or 71 and had perhaps not even seen 1999 is now waking up to China's perfidy and China's backstabbing. There are 3 or 4 national priorities that I would like to mention here before I conclude. One, have an omnibus national security law that is, and if it takes too much time, I would advise our bureaucrats and our government to please, for the time being, just copy and paste the US law in this regard. We need a national security framework which has a consistent, transparent, reasonably transparent, and long-term approach as to what constitutes a threat, national security threat to India outside of the direct military threat. So we already have a military doctrine, and that doctrine is playing out. We don't need to interfere with that. What we need is a national security doctrine for all our infrastructure, for our capital markets, and for the e-commerce digital world. That includes things like the subjects that Vineet Goenka has been pushing for and championing for so many months. And there are many more activists in this regard. And that's point number one. Point number two, we need to understand that we will have to live with China for the future, not just because of its annexation of Tibet and how it is a direct neighbor who surrounds us for a significant part of our land boundaries. And if you take Pakistan as a junior failed state ally of China, then you realize that China has this string of pearls strategy where it is trying to contain us and hem us down. So what we therefore need to recognize is that China has deindustrialized many parts of the world, many countries in Europe, and significant parts of the US national economy over the last 2 decades, 3 decades. The United States is perhaps only now waking up because it is the ultimate capitalist society, that it has surrendered its lead both in technology and cultural terms to a country like China, which does not care about human rights, which does not care about partnerships, and which is only now waking up like that brute who woke up and realized that it had a lot of power. So China's growth as a nation, as a responsible nation, is still some decades away. We are far more ahead of them because India has been an open society and India has deep-rooted cultural roots where the respect of life and culture, other cultures, has in fact been perhaps a temporary weakness also. Therefore, let us not get emotional and believe that we can rid ourselves of China overnight. We will have to have a 10-year strategy of ensuring that just like 15, 20, 25 years back, we had a very small trade deficit with China. And if you look at the composition of our trade with China, it can easily be reversed. And when I say easily, it can be done by our Indian industry. It is the policy infrastructure and the policy response that keeps our industry from being able to do it. When you have impossible standards being set and demanded from Indian manufacturers, they cannot compete. Just see a tender that was being issued, and this has been reported in the last 24 hours, where a tender by a government agency, I think it was the Railways, Indian Railways, was so cleverly and so craftily being set in favor of a Chinese company, where in the tender specifications, a patented proprietary technology of Hikvision was included in the tender. So the tender was open for all practical purposes, but one line which said that the applicant vendor should have such and such characteristics, and there is a particular patented Hikvision technology. And by the way, that technology is also stolen and copied from some US company. And finally, we woke up. So we will need a 10-year strategy where we start removing China from our system. It is a tumor that has grown in our system. And I take Mr. Chandrasekhar's point that Chinese companies allowed us to bargain with other suppliers. And I remember what Mr. Pramod Mahajan, the late communication minister, did with Nokia and Motorola for the MTNL mobile phone tender and got them to reduce prices. But I would say 20 years later, the stage is now where even if we have to pay a price in money terms higher for equipment, it will be still a lesser price than paying for the bodies of 20 of our soldiers and braves on the border. So therefore, we need a system where we recognize that things may get costly, there will be disruptions, but the Chinese tumor has to be removed from our body politic and our body economic. And finally, and this is the most important part, I would urge the government of the day to follow through on what the Prime Minister has so beautifully articulated, which is Atmanirbharta. Remember, 20 years back, 25 years back, the RSS, the Swadeshi Jagran Manch, and the BJP to a lesser extent used to talk about Swadeshi. Somewhere Swadeshi was sacrificed at the altars of a new consumerism of the Indian classes, because politicians of all colors, creed, caste, and parties were happy in providing cheap goods and were worried about inflation. They were very happy to kowtow to China and its cheap, perhaps even substandard quality products. I think there is necessity now where we recognize that national sovereignty cannot be mortgaged away at the altar of politics. And that is why I would urge the authorities that the Atmanirbhar slogan now needs to take shape in the form of a new industrial manufacturing policy that is relevant for the next 20 years. We will take that much time to secure our economy against China, even as we fight on the borders to secure our borders against China. I am very confident about our military response with God's grace, but I am not confident about our economic response to the threat that China represents. And therefore, I would say the time has come in the year of 2020, and despite all the challenges, where the world is now realizing the threat that China poses, not just because of land grabs or sea island grabs, but because of the way they played around with the coronavirus also. It is time that we formulate a specific 10 to 20 year vision which allows Indian industry to manufacture and which ensures that bureaucratic hassles, land hassles, and other hassles that have been added on in the last 20 years, including ridiculous portions of the company law, which were gifted to our economy by the UPA government, are removed, and Indian industry is trusted by the government of the day to become a partner in protecting this old nation against the threat of the Middle Kingdom. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sid. You always come up with this beautiful, innovative thought to any issue that you deal with. So I'm so glad that I invited you once again to speak on the subject. Thank you very much. We'll take up questions and then we'll come back again for a round of final comments from our speakers. Before that, I would like to know if Lieutenant General Vinod Bhatia ji would like to comment on the subject if he's interested in. Sir, would you like to comment on this, sir?
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
It's great listening to them. I'll be in listening mode. Thank you.
Okay, sir. Okay, fine. Thank you very much. Okay, so we'll go on to the questions. I have a question, based on what Chandrasekhar ji talked about with regard to how the government, does its procurement. Do you think that the current the current procurement policies and the kind of timelines that we have to these kind of technologies that we need to develop within the domestic industry, is it conducive for any amount of indigenous effort that can happen in this country? And what is the time frame that you look at, and what are the challenges you see on this front?
Yeah. I think, Vipin, that there are two very simple and direct prongs. One is how we procure things, and the second is how we support research. These are the two essential things, and manufacturing will automatically become a part of how we handle these two things. And when I talk about manufacturing, I am not talking about manufacturing within a protected market. It's manufacturing at an international quality and an international scale. So to start with the procurement part that you referred to, I think that the way that we are procuring things, and mind you, I'm not one of those who is in favor of putting all these procurement guidelines and stipulations only on BSNL and making them even more uncompetitive. And you are saying that you pay the extra cost, your market share itself is 10%, and then you want to load all of these costs. I think that is not the right way to do it, in my opinion. What you have to do is to have certain set of conditions across the market which apply to everybody, And there is therefore no competitive differential between one company and another. At the same time, we know that we cannot completely depend on domestic sources at the current moment. It has to be analyzed carefully, and where we have a domestic capability which is of international quality, we should find a way to ensure that the procurement is done from these sources without giving them any protection. If somebody else wants to, be it a company from some other country or some other region, they will actually have to set up some manufacturing capabilities here. In the electronic segment, unless you have a global scale, it's very difficult to manufacture competitively because it's a very high volume, high velocity, low margin business. But telecom, we have such a huge demand that we can actually move that needle a little bit. And by enabling the Indian companies or foreign companies setting up operations in India to bring in technology, I think to some extent we will be leapfrogging. So point number one is that in the procurement, if there is a competing Indian product of acceptable standard, then we have to find a way to ensure that those companies get the opportunity. If it is not there, then we have to ensure that whatever imported product is taken, and this is about high volume areas, they will have to actually set up manufacturing facilities within the country. Otherwise, they will not be eligible for providing this infrastructure. This can be done within the framework of WTO on the basis of security. The US has done it. That is how they have kept Huawei outside. They were members of the same WTO to which we are members of. And if you see, they had buried this bar or ban 3 levels deep. So we have to get a little sophisticated also in terms of how we ban products which are, not doing what we want them to do, which is to actually manufacture in India or be of Indian origin. I don't think that we should confine it only to Indian companies. That is not going to make us very competitive. It will only lead to complacency. But we need to ensure manufacturing in India and unbridled competition within that manufacturing. The second is, as far as the research part is concerned, I think that CDOT is one of the better or one of the best organizations. At least in the past it was. Even today, I believe it's a fairly good organization. So while on one side we encourage them, their weak area is not research. Their weak area is in commercialization of the research. They had come up with some beautiful products like, for example, shared random access networks, SRAN as it is called, which would have hugely brought down the cost of our infrastructure because it can be active infrastructure shared by multiple service providers. So the research capability is there, the commercialization is not, and it is all because of fairly complicated government procedures. Kisko dena hai, kaise dena hai, kyun dena hai, isko kyun dena hai, usko kyun nahi dena hai, all that, those kind of usual wrangles. So that is where the real challenge lies. Finally, I think it's very, very important to recognize that in a lot of the electronics areas and communications in particular, the role of the defense is huge as a buyer and as a supporter of R&D. And I think that one of our greatest failures has been in the failure to link defense procurement, where we are the largest importer across the world, to a longer term strategy of manufacturing domestically and R&D within the country. And if we don't do that, even though our civilian requirements in most parts of telecom may be quite high, our research, I'm afraid, will still lag. Just as an example, a lot of the technologies which have been released for civilian use, both by Israel and by US, were actually developed for military purposes. Of course, they release it only when they have the nth technology and or n+1th technology, and the current technology is then released. So you're always one generation behind. That's not good enough. So we have to use imported technology to catch up with the current generation, but then have our own research to take it to the next level. So I think these are really critical things. And it has to be a concerted strategy over a period of time. I don't think that we can, keep shifting our strategy. We can calibrate our measures to the conditions. But this longer term strategy, as the speakers earlier were referring to, is absolutely critical. We have not been able to follow up with a sustained strategy over a period of time.
Okay, okay, sir. That's an elaborate answer there. Siddharth, I would like to come back to you and ask you about this, what Chandrasekhar ji had also pointed out earlier regarding this technologies that can be used to influence political outcomes during elections in India, I mean, or anywhere else for that matter around the world. And we have seen this debate happening around the US election, 4 years ago, 3 years ago. And what could be the national security implications when it comes to a political change that can be influenced by such technologies? What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, that's a great question, and I think the last 5 6 years post 2013-14, it was actually the 2014 election where social platforms played a role. I think somebody has his microphone open, and there's a lot of background noise. May I request somebody in the audience? So the role and power of social networks in India's politics actually became evident in the 2014 elections, and since then it has matured. But I believe that unlike the United States, the average Indian is far more politically illiterate, even if he may not have other forms of literacy, and therefore Facebook, Twitter, or any social platform has that much limited influence. But of course, in a post-COVID era, I would reserve full comments on this matter till I see the next election play out, and how, due to the restrictions of Corona, will our grassroots election rally, man-to-man contact type of electioneering work out. One small addition, Bipin, in response to what Mr. Chandrasekhar also said. You have covered this. You're a defense correspondent, strategic affairs correspondent, and our outlay on our latest fighter aircraft plan. It always struck me that it was a MiG that brought down a Falcon 16, and it was not the latest generation fully equipped plane. But I just wanted our audience to reflect on the fact that the year where we finalized the specs of the order for what eventually became the Rafale purchase, and not even talking about the decision that has been taken yesterday, the value of Saab, which manufactures the Gripen, in terms of its market cap, was $1 billion. Why I say this, and I would request 30 more seconds for the audience to think about it carefully. India, which had an outlay of $20 billion on the table for buying planes, had a bid from a company whose total market cap was $1 billion. Now, what have the Chinese done? What have the Americans done in similar examples? They have not purchased the products of such companies. They have purchased those companies lock, stock, and barrel. When Facebook wanted to grow in peer-to-peer messaging, it purchased WhatsApp. So our greatest problem is the inertia and the perpetual catch-up our system does with policy making. We are now discussing cybersecurity, e-commerce, social, data protection. What should have been done 5 years back? And I honestly don't know why it happens. Because is there, and with due apologies, Mr. Chandrasekhar, is there a closed system of decision making? Is it that while we have Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, we do not have an IT regulatory authority in that sense? We do not yet have an e-commerce regulatory authority. and it's just 25, 30 people and a few ministers whose awareness and understanding of issues may not be that much, who decide policy for 1.3 billion Indians, sir.
Shekhar sir, would you like to respond?
Okay, I think at some point, Siddharth, when it comes to talking to a journalist, you're accustomed to putting people on the spot. Yeah, but I think what you have raised is an important point that, and you'll have to forgive me for being a little philosophical.
Yes.
Based on my experience in the government. See, to do these kind of things, you have to take certain strategic decisions. You have to back certain horses. You can't sort of adopt a hands-off attitude and say, "नहीं नहीं, हम किसी को touch नहीं करेंगे. हर एक transaction अलग-अलग होगा. अपने merit पे आ जाओ and all that." You have to back some horse for several years. That's what they have done. Now, where I come to philosophy is, a government cannot do this if there is no trust. And we, unfortunately, have an environment where, such decisions become, because they are necessarily at some level arbitrary. You choose somebody because you believe that, they have the ability, or that they will, do what is needed. So we have to figure out some way to get over that, because that has been our big problem. That is indirectly what I was referring to when I was talking about CDOT not being able to commercialize great research which they have done. CDAC has also had the same problem, partly, of course, because of their relatively weak marketing skills, but strong research and production capability. That has been the story of India's public sector. So, so that is really, the question. I think some people have come up with innovative solutions to this problem. For example, they said, okay, we have a problem. We have a system where we can't take such decisions without leading to lots of serious questions. So while back only one horse, back two horses and put a semi-competitive kind of environment. But still that involves some, element of selection and then working with that party for a long time. So these are some of the kinds of innovation which are needed. Now, it's not that such innovation is not possible. We have seen, for example, in areas like e-governance, where very innovative solutions are possible. But for many years, we could not get innovative solutions because every tender started with saying, show us 3 installations where you have already been working. Show us a company which has been there for 3 years. So you might as well write in the specs that all innovation is strictly prohibited.
Yes, yes, very good point.
Similarly here, so how did they get over that? They have come up with the Swiss challenge route, saying that, okay, a company, if it, as long as it demonstrates the capability, as long as its solution is innovative, you come with your solution and we'll subject it to open challenge. Anybody who can challenge it is welcome. Otherwise, you will get the order. So similar innovations in the procurement process are essential, not just desirable, are essential if we are to deal with the kind of problem that you were mentioning. And that's a big problem that we face as a country. But we have not found a systemic solution. Individual officers have done it at great risk to themselves, I might add.
Yes, yes.
The reward for this kind of a decision is, if everything goes right, thank your stars and get out. If anything goes wrong, you are buried.
Yeah, the CBI comes after you. Absolutely, I agree, sir.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much. I'm trying to draw Lieutenant General Vinod Bhatia ji into the conversation because there was one important point that Shekhar ji raised, and that relates to the defense sector. And I was, trying to get a perspective on that. Vinod Bhatia ji, would you be interested in talking about the kind of challenges that the defense forces, armed forces face when it comes to the, because they also procure their communication equipment from, from the open market. Through tenders, and obviously there are a lot of companies, even Indian companies, which have Chinese components in it, and it becomes a huge vulnerability for the armed forces. If you could just give us a perspective on that, sir, and then we'll move on to the next aspect and then close the event.
Thank you very much. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you're perfectly audible, sir.
Oh, thank you very much. Very, very excellent education to all of you, actually. Very interesting discussions. Yes, it is the defense sector which have driven the technology challenges. If it is not, it's a structural and systematic fault in our defense sector. We have invested in some strategic technologies, but we also have to understand that most of the technology required in the defense, 80% are low to medium technologies, which were neglected. So we have, it has also brought in dual-use technologies. I think the problem is that let me put it bluntly, it is the L1 system. There's no T1. There's no Q1. So it is the lowest bidder. We have to cut costs. And that is a very major problem because it's controlled by by the finance people. We are a nation where Munshis, were responsible for the death knell sounded to great empires because he would do his bookkeeping right, and we have not learned from there. Today also, I have to face the the auditor. I have to face the financial advisors, and that is a very major problem. DRDO has also got the same issues out there. I don't know how to get over it. But yes, the defense has to lead the technologies. There's no doubt about it. And we have to have a plan. And the technology plan has to be part of the national security strategy, as I brought out earlier. That's imperative. We also have to understand that in a post-COVID emerging world order, geotechnologies will drive or directly influence geoeconomics, geopolitics, and geostrategy. India, the global leader, has to take the lead. India has to ensure that if we have some indigenous technology definitely developed, but we are like I said, buy the companies. So there's no point in investing $20 billion in a $1 billion company. So that is something which we need to do, like Facebook bought on WhatsApp. We should be willing to buy off companies and major stakes in the companies if we can't. It's not a question of catch up anymore. We have to have technologies. The aspirations of India have to be met. We are a global leader. If we have to be there right now, technologies is something we'll have to really, do something about. Every time we get there, and suddenly the goalposts change. We started doing well in the economy, the things change. So that is something which I love to say. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, sir. That is a very important perspective as far as this debate is concerned. That's why I wanted you to make your comments there. Thank you very much for that. And
so, Bipin, if you don't mind, I just want to add one point in response to
most welcome, sir.
What you just said. You see, this is a perfect example to illustrate some of the systemic challenges and possible solutions also. I'm never one who believes pointing out a problem unless I have some alternative to offer. We have talked about the need to acquire a company sometimes rather than buy the product. Fine. I think that's a absolutely straightforward and unexceptionable proposition. But when you go to buy, there is a price you have to pay. And the price is arbitrary because you are not going to invite bids. You are buying one particular company. You already decided which company to buy and why. But as far as the price is concerned, there is, a certain, necessarily a certain arbitrariness. For example, why did Facebook pay $19 billion for WhatsApp? Why not 10? Why not 20? The beauty lies in the eye of the beholder. So that becomes an arbitrary decision. And when it gets questioned by the system, then individuals, individuals become very wary. And I think that, especially in the final days of the previous government, I'm talking about pre-2014, even decisions by committees of officers, very well-placed officers, very respected people, and large committees, not 2 people or 3 people, half a dozen people, they were also questioned, subjected to a grueling inquiry and all of that. So much so that even if that decision was approved by even a cabinet subcommittee, that was also subject to approval. Now, there has to be a limit to this kind of madness. I think we cannot inflict this kind of injury on ourselves. Somewhere it has to be put a full stop to. But it's equally important, and that's why I was mentioning about trust, that people have to see the system also as being fair, that within the country, people who have that capacity are given the opportunity and the best person wins. The examples which were mentioned about, there is no T1 and all that. I think, the GFR, including the defense, because they follow a different procurement practice, there is enough room to accommodate all these things. You can have, this QCBC is a good example. You can give anything from 10% to 100% weightage to the technical evaluation. It all depends on the individuals or the committee that is involved taking those decisions. I think the reason is that people are very hesitant to take that decision, and systemically, we have stopped using these tools because of the fear factor, and fear factor rests ultimately on the lack of trust, which has built over a period of years. It's a cancer which has developed for a very long time, and it will take us, I think, a lot of effort and determination to get rid of that.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Fantastic discussion, but I have one last question to Vineet Goenka before we go ahead and come for some final round of comments from the speakers, the three panelists today. Vineet, let me ask you this question. Now that we know the scenario, we know what are the challenges and what are the vulnerabilities. Let me know what the audience know. What is the future? What should this government do now as a follow-up step to the banning of this 59 mobile apps, and then take forward this national security and national technology efforts that are going on, within India, and probably acquiring some technology from abroad, which is not a threat to the Indian security system. So, does the onus and the responsibility lie with the government on this? Can you just comment on this?
Yeah, I think what Chandrasekhar sir has already talked about, the devil of the procurement process, where the journalists like you, and we felt that the bureaucrats were the devils, but the elected representative. But let me tell you, the procurement process has two components. One is the paper, and the another is the person. The paper is the documentation which, if it is faulty, then it's a challenge. If the person is faulty, then there is a challenge. But there is one more hidden P in that, apart from the paper and the person, that is perspective. The perspective is actually a floating thing. And what is the present perspective is, now the country has evolved, and now the country has understood the challenges which is created because of this ultra conscious procurement process, and the ultra, being kind to the others. So as I said, paper may be same, person may be same, but the perspective today has changed. And thanks to the current leadership, which has shown something which is called as BAT, it has shown a very firmness. So I think we have evolved. Now, while we will talk about L1s and T1s and this thing, I was in multiple committees and I have seen the same challenge which Chandrasekhar ji is talking about. But with one decision of this 59 app, I think we have sent a message, very, very serious message. The China's dream of digital colonization has come to abrupt stop. I'll give you, if you permit me 2 minutes, I'll give you two examples. Yes, now India is talking about breaking the procurement or imports into three parts, ABC. But there are things like which under the A category, which we cannot avoid even if we want. And Siddharth will, accept. For example, lithium. We don't have a single gram of lithium ore in India. So tomorrow, if you want to go electrical vehicle, we will have to import it because we don't have any advantage of that lithium. But I'll also give you one example of refrigerator where our past killed us. And how did it kill us? Siddharth, you remember we used to have a fridge from Godrej where, the grandfather would buy it, the father would put the string to it, and the grandson would use it. But then, the WTO was signed, we opened the floodgates and we had these nice brands coming in. I don't want to name the brand, but the brands which came in. And the brands chose not to manufacture refrigerator in India. Subsequently, we forgot how to make a compressor of refrigerator. So going backward, the academics, engineering colleges stopped that chapter because आगे किसी को job ही नहीं है, तो why do we need an engineer to learn how to set this compressor? So today, if you see entire academics, we don't have a compressor chapter. So even if today we decide not to import a refrigerator, as simple as refrigerator, we will have to wait for another 6 years till the first engineer comes out. हमारे पास chapter ही नहीं है, पढ़ाने वाला नहीं है, पढ़ने वाला नहीं है. So these particular challenges, but one good part, I mean always positive. I mean always positive. The perspective change. Have you ever thought that a person at a stature of Chandrasekhar ji, like secretary of the with you, there will be a person of Siddharth's this thing, and talking to somebody as young and as novice is like me, the system. This only happened because perspectives have changed. Now we are moving out of that regime where things will only happen by munchis, but probably now we are talking about this openness. Did you ever think that somebody coming from the government talking about a specific case of Twitter and fighting against the system? We had never seen this in the earlier regimes. He would have been thrown out of the thing. I'm still governing council member of railway, but I enjoy that I can keep my own mind very clearly. So I think probably we'll have to understand 2-3 things and force our decision maker, whether the decision maker is a politician, whether the decision maker is a bureaucrat, technocrat, or a munshi, that we'll have to go indigenous. There is nothing called as part import, part this thing. We'll have to think in that terms, where there is nothing called as red, amber, green data, but the data security, data localization has to be talked about, data sovereignty has to be talked about, and like data, any other thing also we should try to make it local. As vocal we will become on local, probably our future will be safeguarded. Or else, Bipin, I'm very sure, like we sometimes curse our ancestors. I give a very common example, many of the audience would have heard from my mouth, that China could build thousands of kilometers of wall. Siddharth, I always wonder, Siddharthji, all our aggressors entered from the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa area. Okay. And what is the gap in that Khyber Pass? It is 32 kilometers. China वाले 3000 किलोमीटर का दीवार बनाते, हम 32 किलोमीटर का दीवार नहीं बना पाए. Our country is now not even 1/3 of the original size. Our population, our civilization is not even 1/5 of the original size. Just because we forgot to make that wall of 35 kilometers. I think probably there's a time we wake up, and if we don't do that, like we blame our ancestors, people will blame you, Bipin, me, Siddharth and Chandrasekhar ji, that you have not taken decisions in the right time.
Bipin, I just want 1 minute to interject.
We are actually coming to the closing remarks. Please, Siddharth, I'll start with you. You can give your opening.
Okay. Yeah, no, fair enough. No, I'll follow the format.
No, Vineet is finished, so I think I'll come to you first for the closing remarks.
I guess I have a couple of minutes for that. So let me just recap and take up one point. The fact that I am arguing for is the following. I was a school student when the reforms of the 90s happened, and those reforms, as we all know, and Mr. Chandrasekhar was in service, happened due to a balance of payment crisis that was again caused by an external factor. And a complete generation of Indians has benefited from the opening up of the Indian economy. If we go back beyond that, I have always believed and I have argued, and of course, Lieutenant General Bhatia and others here would know much better, that I believe that we would not have had the success in the 71 war had we not faced the challenge of the 62 war. Because the 62 war was a wake-up signal that allowed us to prepare in the interim for the attack that for the 71 war. And the success that we saw in the 71 war stayed with us and has continued to stay with us so far. Therefore, my point, and I'm rambling, but I'll now come to the point. My point is that the deaths of 20 Indians have unleashed a massive amount of emotions, and we know rationally that in a few weeks, months, it will be forgotten by a large number of people. It will still be part of the pain of the families who have borne that loss. But I believe, and I am hopeful, and I hope I am not wrong, that this has suddenly focused the attention of even the average Indian who could not or would not be bothered with such issues about the real threat that we face from China. And China today does not symbolize just a threat on our borders over land. I think it is now leading to a lot of soul searching within the system. And I believe that the steps that the government of the day has taken, including the Prime Minister's extremely strategically significant and symbolic visit today to Leh, is that a process of disengagement has perhaps been initiated. It will now be up to Indian industry to deliver through on that, because clearly the government alone or the political setup alone cannot deliver. So in summation, I think the events of Galwan are a wake-up call and may perhaps just be the seed that we need to understand that the first wave of globalization that was initiated and the reforms that were initiated in the 90s, that whole thing has changed almost after 30 years. And any of you who believe in astrology know that Saturn has moved its house after 30 years. And I believe that we are now on another epoch of the next 20, 30 years, which will be very different from the past, from a globalization, trade, economy, national security, strategic affairs perspective. And one would just hope and pray that this wake-up call is not forgotten till the next attack.
Thank you, sir. Chandrasekhar sir, for your final comments for the day.
I think I have already shared a lot of thoughts. I don't really have too much to add, except that I think that, what are the events of the past few months, 2020 in particular, and the multiple huge challenges that it has brought, has forced us to seriously think how we are going to achieve a greater measure of self-reliance. But in a globalized world, I think we have to be very, very careful about the messaging, because if our messaging is that we have decided to close our sort of borders in an economic sense, then that is going to be far more detrimental to our economy. So we have to actually be able to message it in such a way that we are open to all, barring some exceptions for specific reasons which we have already discussed. But we have to be open for people to come in with technology, for people to come in with investment. But the situation where you can just access the market without bringing in any of this, we'll have to, I think, see how we can sort of close that tap a little bit. But I think it's very important to understand that if we talk very strongly about being self-reliant without clarifying and without careful messaging, because of all the problems that we have been discussing today, we may not do much in that direction, but we would have scared off a lot of people, and we'll achieve the worst of both worlds, of not achieving our objective and also scaring away those who are already to some extent involved in the Indian economy. So I think we have to do it with a very, very carefully calibrated strategy. But I think that if this series of events wakes us up to that and makes us do it, I think when history is written, we can say that just as 1991 crisis forced us to do some things which were good anyway, which we should have done without the crisis. Similarly, we hopefully will say that when this crisis came, we did things which we should have done anyway.
Thank you very much, sir. Vineet, for your final comments on the subject.
See, I think probably, Chinese aggression, we should look at as a larger thing. There is nothing called as our enemy country, friendly country, half friendly country. Our dependence on any other foreign supplier will challenge our autonomy. There will be dictations to us. So we should not only avoid immediate neighbors who are threat to our sovereignty, but also avoid anything. There is a very simple old saying which is written outside every health joint: frugal eating keeps a man healthy. I think as a consumer, we should make sure we have frugal habits, eat less. Eat less is not only the food, but the consumption should be less so that we don't go on importing things. And yes, rightly said by Chandrasekhar sir, you need not always put that out as a signage. I look as Jainism as a very nice concept sometimes, where they eat only what is there in their hand, and they do not eat till they donate a portion of that to other person. So we should not consume till we export a certain portion of our own consumption to the outside world. So once we have this habit of eating less and exporting at least something from my own job, my own work, then I think as a country we will be successful.
Thank you, Vineet. Thank you for those thoughts. I think you said it really well. That till about a couple of decades ago, we were not so consumerist, and we had very frugal needs, and then that took care of things. But as uh, generations pass, there will be some technological development that we are living, and then we won't. There can't be a situation where we won't be dependent on technologies in the future. So obviously, the consensus today is that we need to be wary of the Chinese invasion through these mobile apps and through through the 5G technology that is an emerging technology for India. And I think the Indian government should also invest more on local technology development so that we are self-reliant at some point in time. And this Atmanirbhar idea of the Prime Minister is taken forward at some point of time. So with this, I would like to thank all the panelists for being here. Chandrasekhar ji, thank you very much. Siddharth Zarabi, thank you very much. And Vineet Goenka, thank you for being here and for all your thoughts. The formal vote of thanks will be delivered by the Secretary General of Law and Society Alliance, Advocate Kumar Vaidyanathan, who is Mumbai-based and takes care of our Mumbai-based activities. I would also like to recognize and thank some of my colleagues, Ayaz Khan Das, who is very diligently taking notes of this conversation and will be preparing a short report for publication in Defense Capital, later today. And now I'll give the mic to Advocate Kumar Vaidyanathan for the vote of thanks. Kumar?
Thank you, Vipin. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
On behalf of Law and Society Alliance, I wish to thank R. Chandrasekhar ji, former President NASSCOM, Vineet Goenka ji, Secretary, Center for Knowledge Sovereignty, and Siddharth Zarabi, public policy commentator and TV anchor. About the whole thing, like minimalism, concepts like frugal eating, all those things can help us. But at the same time, we also have to become Atmanirbhar. So Atmanirbhar tha having a proper R&D, vocal for local. These are the ideas which we have come up today. Thank you everyone for your excellent ideas, and rightly said by Vineet ji that colonialism has brought us to forget our identity. But today we are waking up, and the giant is waking up. The Indian giant is waking up to take on the dragon. So I think we are on the right path, and this think tank has come up with a great, excellent idea. And I thank all the participants who are part of this today's event. Thank you so much. We'll be trying to host more such events where we can try to go ahead with what is needed so that our country becomes Vishwa Vidhata once again. Thank you, Vipinji. Back to you.
Thank you. With this, I want to thank Lieutenant Vinod Bhatia for his presence here today. And with this, we end the program on a good note. We'll come back again with more such programs and request all your participation and support for it. Thank you very much. We close the program here today. Thank you. Kumar, Vineet.
I'm staying back.
Yeah, stay back. Vijay, please stay back. Vijay, please stay back. Bala Venkat, please stay back.